to acknowledge and welcome us to country, would you please welcome Janet Gulpin, representing Cabanata, Carolyn Driggs and the Bunwaring Foundation.
Accessible coastline, but all that's accessible we love dearly. So when you're walking or travelling around our country, you have been welcomed by us for all of your journeys. I want to speak to you also today about the 4 values that we all share: celebrating, honouring, respecting and learning. Today we are celebrating this event and we are also honouring sacred ground. By doing this, we honour our community. Today is also a day of learning, and through learning, we respect each other. It is important for all Victorians and guests to understand and appreciate the history and the culture of the First Peoples of Melbourne, who played a very significant role in the development of Melbourne, both before and after European arrival. But unfortunately, they are unknown to many people who live in this land. The struggle to not only preserve their culture, but their cultural heritage and also their traditions began in the 1830s with the elders. One of the lessons that we should take from this struggle was the way that the leaders of the day and the elders worked together that led to, and forged alliances that led to many of the achievements that we all take for granted today. As Australians, while we may have all descended from different language groups, from different clans, and from countries all across the world, we can all learn from this lesson of our leaders and elders of the days past. The word welcome in Bunwurrung is Womanshaka, but it also translates to come with purpose. It is also a contract between the people as the custodians of the land and yourselves to ensure that our laws
Thanks very much, Janet. Before we start with any speeches, when Simon Crean first launched our cultural policy in Creative Australia, it was our First Nations, our diversity, our institutions, and then it went on to deal with the communication of our art around the world and also the centrality of the artist. The next artist, the first artist that we're performing for us today, brings all of that together. Japuru takes a musical instrument that has been on this land since the first sunrise. He uses Charlie McMahon's technology to transfer it into polypipe with a trombone mechanism so that it can then play the scales, and then uses the latest electronic equipment to create a sound that is entirely new and entirely Australian. Please welcome Japuru.
Australian made. Tony, thanks for bringing me down here from Queensland, the best rugby league country in the world. And I'll tell you right now, if there's any fellow who should be running the Ministry of Arts, it's that, my brother. Thanks for having me.
Gafuru. For those of you who've had a chance to look through the policy that Labor's launching today for the arts policy and cultural policy for a shorter Labor government, you will have seen a very significant emphasis on First Nations, both First Nations dance and First Nations theatre. The first of the speakers that we have today is one of the most significant figures in the country for First Nations theatre. You will have seen her on stage in the original production of The Sapphires. You will have seen her on screen in Radiance. Rachel Mazza is the Artistic Director of Ilbidjeri Theatre here in Melbourne, a First Nations theatre company which, as a result of today and today's announcements from Bill Shorten, that company will have a direct pathway towards joining the list of major performing arts companies. Please welcome Rachel Mazza.
What an extraordinary day. I'm so excited to be here with the current vision, extraordinary vision of this incoming government. It's such an incredible honour to be here, to be standing alongside and sharing in this hugely significant way forward for this country. So I want to thank Auntie Janet for her extraordinary and beautiful welcome. Thank you so much. Such an honour. And of course, pay my respects to our elders, their elders that are in the room, past and present. And just to also acknowledge, I was at another function the other day and Uncle Larry Walsh was there. He's a Tamarong elder, one of the Kulin Nation, and he reminded me that actually all of us in this room have our elders, and that actually let's acknowledge all those elders. All of you come from the wisdom of the elders that come before you. So I want to acknowledge all our elders. And then I'm currently Artistic Director of Ilbidjeri Theatre and have been done for the last 11 years, but my story goes way back before that. So I also want to acknowledge the elders that have come before me, in particular my father Bob Mazza, alongside Uncle Jack Charles, and many members of the community here in Melbourne, established the first modern black theatre company, Nindathana, in 1971. A year after that, my family, in 1972, moved to Sydney to establish what would be then called the National Black Theatre Company. And I was about 7 at that time. So basically, the life of the modern black theatre as we know it has happened in my lifetime. So that probably says I'm really old, but in the grand scheme of things, that's actually not a long time. So black theatre was born out of the political fires of the late 60s. And we all know of the 1960 referendum, where a good majority, a major majority of Australia voted yes on the fundamental principle that First Nations are at the heart and soul of who we are as a nation, if I'm to summarise. And yet at this time, we'd had the referendum, but actually in terms of the community, nothing had actually changed. And hence this steamrolling, building wave of discontent was building. And I remember as a small child going on many marches, hearing the shouting, watching the street theatre that was the beginnings, the seeds of black theatre as I know it, in amongst banners and protest. Protest was in the air, pinging. And I remember being on the lawns as a small child of the old Parliament House before they built the flash one. And I remember that world, and actually one thing I also remember about that world, it was that feeling of coming together as a country, because it wasn't just black fellas down there were white fellas down there protesting on the lawns of Parliament House. And it's in that spirit that I feel that we're here today. Black theatre was the voice of the people. It was a tool and a way in which we could speak freely and articulate the ongoing fight for land rights, for human rights, for self-determination and justice, the fight that still continues today. So Black Theatre was founded on the principles of self-determination to be able to tell our stories our way. I apologise for this history lesson, but often when you live in a country where progress is so slow, it's like we need to keep going over the lessons until we're ready to move forward. So for over 200 years, the Australian narrative continues to be written by those who have enjoyed the prosperity, the privilege and the benefits of colonisation. And one could argue that they have an invested interest in maintaining a particular narrative that tells the story of glorious discovery, of peaceful settlement, and of the inevitable and necessary, and now we frame it with possibly regretful, advancement of civilisation. And thank goodness we finally got rid of the terra nullius myth. So as well as those who are privileged, there are those who haven't privileged. Of course, the First Peoples of this country. And as the growing statistics and the increasing gap continue to remind us that our largely disadvantaged First Nations people are living with the ongoing impacts of colonisations on a daily basis. And we all know the mantra, not about us, without us. Hence the need for our voice, our narrative, our right to be self-determined in writing our narrative. Be it, whether that's standing alongside government or in education or in the arts. Hence, I welcome and applaud any and all commitment from our governments to redress the ongoing disadvantage experienced by the First Peoples of this land, so that we can move forward as a nation to one that celebrates, honours and values its long and rich history, going back at least 80,000 years. The oldest continuous living culture in the world. This sets us apart from anywhere else on this planet. And just as a last point, I would also like to suggest that maybe we have something to learn from this very, very old wisdom. In fact, if you think about it, 80,000 years is a pretty good track record. And if you look at the state of the planet at the moment, which this society has managed to achieve in such a short period of time, it does make you wonder. Thank you.
At the age of 12, Eliza Shepherd was awarded first place in the International Flute Festival. And since then, she's received a series of scholarships, including the highest scholarship awarded through the Riverina Conservatorium of Music. A member of the Australian Youth Orchestra for many years and a musician at the Australian National Academy of Music here in Melbourne. For those who are here from ANAM, I'm sure there's some of you are here, that the Labor Party has also announced today $12.5 million towards the redevelopment that you're seeking. Could you please welcome to perform the Great Train Race by Ian Clark, Eliza Shepherd. was just extraordinary. Thank you. Thank you very much. The next speech is from someone you'll know as one of Australia's top actors. I imagine a whole lot of you have been like me and have, among the different series where you've done some binge television, among them was the wonderful Australian drama Clever Man. And Tony Briggs, you would have seen there as one of Australia's great actors on the many times that he's been on our stages and on our screens. It's also important to know that Tony Briggs, given the obsession from some media outlets of late, also wrote and spoke about his mum. And in doing so, what Tony Briggs did was recall when his mum and his auntie sang in Vietnam. Tony Briggs was the writer first for stage and then for screen as what has become one of the all-time classic Australian stories, The Sapphires. Would you please welcome him now?
Briggsy, you there?
There we go.
Not there? Apologies for Briggsy, I thought he was here, I'm sorry.
Well, you can tell him he got a fantastic introduction. The crowd absolutely loved him and they didn't disagree with a single word he said.
I will text him, so.
Wonderful. Okay, well, either we're grateful for the work that he's contributed to the arts or hold that thought if there's a tram on the way or something like that. What I'll do now, though, is go to the introduction of what today is the keynote speech. Before I do, I want to welcome the person who has brought the keynote speaker here today, a great patron and lover of the arts and an artist herself. Welcome, Chloe Shorten. You know, for the arts, it's been 6 very, very long years. I remember debating George Brandis when I was Arts Minister. That's right. Yes. Don't worry, I say Voldemort out loud as well. I remember debating him and saying that I didn't believe he supported arm's length funding and that I believed there would be cuts to the Australia Council, and he went straight out to the cameras and said that my comments were a bald-faced lie. It's exactly what happened, and the arts, as you all know, doesn't simply function through the funding of pet projects. There's an entire ecology out there with the majors, with the small to medium companies, with independent art, with all the different work that individual artists do. And you break that ecology and it hurts the whole sector. We've had those 6 years of where we talk about in every area of policy cuts and chaos. Cuts and chaos absolutely is what we've experienced here. The chaos that they decided to end Creative Australia as a cultural policy and replace it with nothing, with absolutely nothing. No guidance, nothing. And yet, that hasn't been the only challenge that the arts have faced. Because it wasn't just cuts to the Australia Council, cuts to training institutions, cuts to the ABC and SBS, and then new threats with streaming, venues closing, Viagogo ripping off audiences. And yet in the face of all of that, even with all of those forces coming against the sector, look at what this extraordinary sector for Australia has achieved in defiance of that. Every Australian knows the names of actors, Australian actors who are succeeding internationally. We know the names Blanchett, Weaving, Crowe, Griffiths, Collette, Minchin, Hemsworth, and Hemsworth. We know the shows from our major, medium and small independent companies that have toured from Broadway to the Barbican to Bali. Our great authors, Tom Keneally, Kate Morton, Peter Carey, Leanne Moriarty, Tim Winton, Jane Harper and David Malouf, succeeding around the world. The world's leading music festivals now headlined with names like Tame Impala, Courtney Barnett, Gang of Youths and Tash Sultana. Our visual artists like Patricia Piccinini, Michael Zavros and Ben Quilty have developed strong sales internationally and have a massive online following. But even it's not just around the world, the success locally has been extraordinary. The small, medium and independent theatres that have continued to tell our stories, even in the face of government attacks. Major performing arts institutions that have continued to make sure that Australian stories reach the biggest audience possible. Stories of dispossession, disability, disowning and dishonour. The lineup of strong artists who are filling marquees at our music festivals. Angie McMahon, Jack River, Julia Jacklin, Alex the Astronaut, Gordy, Alex Leahy, Charlie Collins. The ensembles that have been formed that are only possible because of our diversity. The visual artists who move between here and the region to create new works that breathe in every influence of the region. The major projects supported by the likes of John Caldor that forever change physical spaces that we thought we knew. The collectives like Field Theory and Aphids that are always creating new work and pushing boundaries. The First Nations artists who in every art form draw on the stories, the songlines, the dances, the battles, the hopes and the dreams that have lived on this land since the first sunrise, and then through their artistry write the next chapter in the world's oldest continuing culture. The fact that this year, this last 12 months, the second most performed playwright on Australian stages has been Nakia Louie. The only playwright to beat her had a significant head start, and his name is William Shakespeare. If this is what the arts can achieve with a government that at best doesn't care and at worst is hostile, imagine. Just imagine, and people in this room are pretty good at that. Imagine what the next few years could hold. A shortened Labor government with cultural policy back in the centre of decision making. Years we can spend looking forward to announcements in the arts portfolio rather than fearing them. First Nations is the first pillar, backed by our diversity, the centrality of the artists, stronger institutions communicated here and around the world, making sure Australians through their art see how they fit into this country, understand each other better and see how the world comes to understand us. That's more than something to imagine. It's something that in a week we can deliver. That's how a shortened Labor government can renew a creative Australia. Please welcome the leader we want to be Prime Minister of Australia, Bill Shorten.
And, in this election, it can throw a few surprises, but I didn't expect Saturday afternoon at the Espy, so this is a good one. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land upon which we meet. I pay my respects to elders, past, present and emerging. And if we want to start with storytelling, how lucky are we in Australia that through 60 and 70,000 years of continuous connection to country, we've got the greatest tradition of storytelling of any continent, of any nation in the world, and I pay my respects to our First Nations people. There were some lovely performances just before, so amazing, so clever. Just gets you thinking how good we are as a people if we just give our people a chance. So Tony's outlined so many of the accomplishments that have happened despite the last 6 years of government. But I want to explain to you why I think arts is important for a nation, why it should be important to a party who seeks to form a government. Because for me, when I think about the arts and that marvellous collective term that comprehends, it's not just a particular performance. It's not just a particular form of presentation. For me, when I think about the arts, I think about our identity. How we tell our story, who we are as a people. How do we go forward and explain to the rest of the world and to future generations who we are? How do we, as Whitman would say, liberate the talents of our people and uplift our horizons? For me, arts policy isn't an add-on. It's not something which you do as an afterthought or as a footnote to other matters. For a Labor government, if you choose to vote for us, we put our story of our arts at the centre of what we do as a nation. The arts is a political issue. The arts does deserve attention and support. The arts does deserve to have a government at least as brave and at least as creative as our own Australian artists. And that's what we will give you next Saturday if you vote Labor. I was trying to visualise what this country would be like without Australian artists. To visualise what a dull and boring proposition we would be. To take away all of our artists as if they were miraculously taken somewhere else. And what would we be left with? We wouldn't be left with the dynamic society that we want to see in the mirror. But really, the proposition I want to put to you today is not our policy. It's a fantastic policy. You should know, you all helped write it. It is a down payment on our future. It's a down payment on our storytelling. It's an investment in our people. It's an investment in all those parents who encourage their kids to take up the creative arts at school. It's an investment in our music and our dramatic arts teachers at those schools. It's an investment not only in our full-time musicians and performers, but in our part-time musos and our part-time performers. But fundamentally, we've got 7 days, people, to help change the nation. You make your judgment on our arts policy. I reckon it's a ripper. But I want you to exercise your judgment, and I am here to enlist you in something even bigger than the arts. This nation is at a turning point. We're like a nation where the door is ajar, but we haven't quite pushed through it to the next destination. Next year, we'll be 20 years through the 21st century. This country hasn't done enough in the last 20 years of our new century. We don't have the time on our side to wait, to become a mediocrity, to become a conservative backwater, frightened of the future, frightened of our neighbours, frightened of action on climate change, frightened of treating people equally. This nation is a tipping point. Do we really want 3 and 6 and 9 more years of this Conservative government? No. Are we really satisfied with the last 6 years and the lack of progress as a nation? As a nation, we've become more unequal. Our carbon pollution's increased. We've become a more divided society, less tolerant of each other, where we see majorities and minorities arguing and criticising each other in a way which I don't think we thought was the case as we finished the 20th century. This nation is at a tipping point. The door is ajar, but the question we ask ourselves in the remaining 7 days of this election is, are we a nation with the courage and the hope to push through that door into the future? Or do we just accept more of the same? There are vested interests arrayed in this nation who do not agree with Labor's priorities. You will not see the Conservatives having an arts policy launch. Well, they don't even have a policy. I mean, that's not stopping their launch tomorrow on other matters. But for them, the arts is something to be suspicious of, to be cut, to tell people what they should produce and how they should perform. We see that in the cuts to the ABC, for example, but not just that. This nation is at a tipping point. So whilst I present our arts policy to you and the greater arts community, I'm actually here to ask something of you. I'm here to ask you to use your capacities for creativity, for telling the story, just like that marvellous video at the start. I ask you in the next 7 days to not just perform and create and write and sing and design. In the next 7 days, I'm saying to you, this is a very close election. This is an election where the nation makes a decision to embrace the next decade of our century with hope, not fear, with optimism, not pessimism, with a sense of looking forward, not looking back, with a sense of including all of us, not just leaving people behind. Tony's right. What this community does and all of its marvellous extensions and forms is remarkable. But I'm asking the whole arts family of Australia, all those marvellous music teachers who perform on weekends and teach our kids during the week, all of the comedians, all of the designers, all of the technical experts, I'm saying to you that if you want a bolder, brighter vision for Australia, if you want to not just tell the Australian story, but tell a bigger Australian story, tell a story of hope, tell a story of fairness, tell a story which says that we are capable of meeting challenges and letting our best selves be our best selves going forward. We need you. I need you to exercise your judgment. I need you to exercise your energy. In a campaign, you make choices about what you do and where you go and what you say. I've made a choice to back in lower paid Australians over the wealthy. I've made a choice to reform the taxation system, the intergenerational scam against our young and the income earners. We've made a choice not to retreat on real action on climate change, but to say we can do this together. I make a choice that we treat women equally to men in the presentation of our MPs, so many being women, right through to equal pay. I can make this choice, Labor can make this choice, but I need you. I love our arts industry, I love our creative sector, I love what you do, I love the stories you tell, the hope you give, the joy you bring, the talents you fulfil. But today I say that if you like what you see, if you bemoan the lack of passion and vision in politics, if you think that the system is broken, if you think that the fix is in and the top end of town or the vested interests seem to get what they want and everyone else gets very little at all, if you think that you would like to see a better politics, a more civil politics, a less toxic politics, a less hate-ridden, one nation, Pauline Hanson, Clive Palmer-style cynicism of Australian politics, if you want to see better, then I'm going to ask you in the next 7 days, tell your friends, tell your colleagues, tell your families, tell your audiences. What we will get on May the 19th is the government that we fight for. What we get on May the 19th, on the Sunday after the election, what we get next weekend is the government that we want to see in the mirror of our own identity. You are the best storytellers this nation can produce in every form and medium and creative medium possible. But I'm putting it on you today. It is not enough. What we now need is action, not words. What we now need is to change the government of Australia, to stop the chaos and write Australia big for the next decade. We've got the plan and the vision, and with you, we've got the energy and the capacity. Let us bring this home together in the next 7 days. Thank you very much.
Just in case anyone missed it, Bill and I have now both performed in the Gershwin room at the Espy. And on